Case studies about Dutch Vandalin's supposed descent into madness is something that you can make hour-long videos about, with plenty of contributing factors building up to Dutch's descent into irrationality and impulsiveness that inevitably saw the demise of the Vandalin gang. However, there is one theory that's been getting about for a while now that suggests one event had a massive effect on Dutch's decision-making in the late game, and that is of course the theory that Dutch sustained a brain injury. So we're going to be looking at how this theory applies, and if so, how it could affect Dutch's character, and then gauge how important it was to the outcome of the story overall. Before we continue with this video, I just wanted to say that this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends is a mobile RPG done right. I know you've probably heard about Raid since people are talking about it everywhere. This is because Raid is one of the top 3 ranked RPGs on the Google Play Store and has just been nominated as a finalist for Google Play's Best of 2019 Users' Choice Award. The game has had almost 15 million downloads in the past 6 months, which is absolutely mental. Raid is an epic dark fantasy hero collection turn-based RPG with over 400 champions for you to collect and personally customize. In Raid, you can gather orcs, the undead, knights, elves and more, assemble a team from 16 heroic factions and explore 1 million plus champion builds. You can also discover 13 spectacular locations with a fully voiced story campaign, and you can also raid with friends in a clan and claim glory in the PvP arena. The best part about Raid is that it's free to play. The game also offers some extra cool features such as multi-battle auto mode, where you can set battles to run into an auto mode while you go and do something else, spending less time on the grind and more time developing your teams doing all the fun stuff. There are also weekly tournaments and events in which you can fight in the arena, run special dungeons, and just level up your heroes. There's always a way to compete and win extra prizes every week. This game is growing super fast, and as you can see through this cool roadmap that they published, over the next 6 months they have huge plans for updates for the game that will be 100% worth your while. Now, I'm not the biggest mobile game player going, however, I do find myself having some considerable fun playing this game. What I like about it is that I now have something to do while I wait for videos to render. You can find me in the game under the username Fizhy with 2 E's on the end. Go to the description of this video, click on the special links, and you can get 50,000 silver and a free epic champion as a part of the new player program to start your journey. So what are you waiting for? I'll see you in the game. Back to the video. It's very important to remember that Dutch is an incredibly complex character, and there will be no simple explanation for his descent into supposed madness, if you will. So I will not be addressing this topic as the reason for the entire debacle that was the Vandalin gang's fate in Red Dead Redemption 2, because to blame any one individual thing would just be completely absurd. So I just want it to be known that I'm not trying to discount all of the other reasons when I'm addressing this one. So before we can understand the theory properly, we need to understand the exact moment where Dutch supposedly picks up this brain injury. And that is of course during Chapter 4 in the mission Urban Pleasures, where Arthur, Dutch and Lunny rob the Saint Denis trolley station. They get given a tip-off to money being stashed in the trolley station courtesy of Angelo Bronte. Upon robbing the place, they realise that it was a setup and the robbery was not worth the hassle. This leads to a massive shootout through the streets of Saint Denis in which Dutch, Lenny and Arthur of course board a trolley. After a while of shooting, the brakes on the trolley break, and this is what follows.
The thing's broke. Hold on!
At the end of the cutscene and in the dialogue in the gameplay that follows, it becomes quite clear that Dutch has sustained a blow to the head. So it's likely that Dutch has at this point sustained a concussion, which is technically a light brain injury. So to answer the face value question, did Dutch Vandalin sustain a brain injury? The answer is yes. But in the context, the question is now, is it relevant? Naturally, Dutch is fuming that Angelo Bronte set them up, so obviously his next move would be to get back at Bronte. Before we get into that, let's take a look at some of the symptoms of concussions. You have your headache or feeling of pressure in the head, temporary loss of consciousness, confusion or a feeling as if in a fog, amnesia surrounding the traumatic event, dizziness or seeing stars, ringing in the ears, nausea, vomiting, slurred speech, delayed response to questions, appearing dazed and fatigue. Of these, Dutch appears to suffer from the following symptoms in this single mission alone, and at a push maybe a couple more. And delayed symptoms that you may experience in the days or hours after such an injury consist of concentration and memory complaints, irritability and other personality changes, sensitivity to light and noise, sleep disturbances, psychological adjustment problems and depression, and disorders of taste and smell. And as we know in the missions that follow in which Dutch is hell-bent on killing Angelo Bronte, he suffers from at least these symptoms. Though I'd go as far as to say that his killing of Angelo Bronte goes from his man with a plan attitude to outright irrationality.
They are even bigger fools than you.
No doubt.
The law will find you. Already, the dogs are on the way.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right. You are so right. They are good at smelling filth, huh? So filth has got to be disposed of. Your friends, the Patriots, gonna come and rescue you. You repulsive little maggot. Call them now. You call them.
Jesus. Part of your philosophy books cover feeding a fella. The goddamn alligator, Dutch.
Part that covers weakness.
So in this scene we see Dutch murder Angelo Bronte by drowning him and then feeding him to alligators, which is an incredibly violent and disrespectful way to kill your enemy. And the strength Dutch draws from in order to do this is his own anger, which is a far cry from the reasonable Dutch that we saw earlier on in this chapter, who managed to rescue Jack from Angelo Bronte simply by talking to Bronte and having John and Arthur agree to deal with some grave robbers. And in the chapter beforehand was willing to negotiate with his biggest rival Colm O'Driscoll, who murdered Dutch's lover Annabelle. And if I was in Dutch's position, I know which one I would rather kill brutally. Hint, not Bronte. In fact, in chapter 1, Dutch expresses a desire to get Colm back for what he did to Annabelle. However, he resists because it's not in the best interest of the gang. The killing of Bronte arguably wasn't either, however, Dutch simply didn't seem to care, meaning that the killing of Bronte was spawned out of pure impulsiveness, which showed a change in Dutch's character, which could be one of the lasting symptoms of the concussion that he sustained not too long beforehand. Well, I'd imagine a lot of people could argue that a concussion would be a short-term brain injury, however they can last for long enough to have an effect on Dutch from when he gets it here to the end of the game. Not in 1907, I mean the end of 1899 part. Before I go on to list more irrational actions that Dutch carries out in the later chapters of the game post this supposed injury, I think it's important to mention that Dutch seems to be quite irritable before he gets his injury, being quite visibly irritable with Molly O'Shea from as early as chapter 3 and Arthur Morgan at the start of chapter 4. So while a brain injury could have made this much more prominent going forward, it was not the only contributing factor to Dutch's declining mental state, as the stresses of leading the gang at this trying time surely did take a toll on him just as well. One thing I did notice after this head injury moment is that Dutch seemed to be a whole lot less reasonable overall. An example of this loss of reason can be seen in chapter 5, in which he insinuates to Arthur that John was somehow a traitor for being arrested during the failed robbery on the bank in Saint Denis.
So what happened with John in that bank? He survived. Unlike dear Hosea and Lenny, the only one they took alive. Why is that, you think? I don't know. I was already on the roof. I didn't see it. And Abigail, I presume she was able to slip away in time. What are you talking about? You know, when I look back at all the chaos of the past few weeks, the apparent superficial chaos, I begin to wonder, maybe, for somebody, this is all going exactly to plan.
Obviously their guide through these caves then demands more money before carrying them further along, to which Dutch just kills her.
Okay,
More.
just a second.
Pay more. Pay now.
Dutch? What are you doing? Jesus. Easy, Dutch. What was that?
Horrible old crone.
But you killed her.
She was gonna betray us, Arthur. Couldn't you tell?
No.
Well, I got some Spanish. She was.
You keep killing folk, Dutch.
I am just trying to make sure that some of us survive, Arthur. Now, shall we proceed?
So how did you know she was gonna betray us? What'd she say?
It was in her eyes, in the way she was leading us.
But you said you knew Spanish.
I know human beings, Arthur.
You gonna strangle me next?
I'm doing the best I can.
After killing her, as we just heard, Dutch lies and makes excuses to justify it, which is a massive change from the character from earlier in the game. Though Heidi McCourt from the botched Blackwater job would beg to differ, Dutch doesn't so much make excuses and lie about that as much as he does just avoid the topic. Later examples in Chapter 6 of Dutch's irrationality and impulsiveness would be his intent on watching Colm O'Driscoll hang, even though going there would require them to go somewhere where they're notorious for committing previous crimes, which is heat that the gang would not need. Furthermore, the killing of Leviticus Cornwall is another example of heat that the gang simply does not need, but Dutch feels the need to go and kill him. And finally, leaving John for dead during the train robbery, and then lying to everyone that he was dead by the time they got there, when in reality he wouldn't know that because he just didn't go back. And these are only a few examples of Dutch's irrationality in the later chapters of the game that just don't add up with the character that we see in the beginning. Now, we do know of outliers in Dutch's reasons, such as Heidi McCourt during the Blackwater heist. However, as the gang falls apart towards the end of the game, Dutch becomes more and more erratic, and these incidents occur much more often, which could be chalked down to the stresses of leading the gang during these trying times, with everyone looking to him, asking him what's next, and when he has no idea, having to say something to save face. Along with the death of his second-in-command, Hosea Matthews, meaning he's all on his own, which coupled with his dwindling faith in Arthur and John would probably lead to such a situation where Dutch is more desperate and therefore more erratic. And with Micah Belland planting the seeds of bad deeds in his ear, there's no one there that he trusts anymore to tell him that listening to Micah might not be the best idea. So for various different reasons, there's a certain shift in Dutch's mental state. So far we've talked about how Dutch sustaining a concussion in that one mission could have had a lasting effect on the remaining chapters of the main game. However, there could be evidence of further traumatic brain injury, as... Now, don't trust Google. If you actually have a brain injury or suspect you have one, go to a doctor. According to this Reddit post regarding the theory, Google describes some of the symptoms as aggression, impulsivity, irritability, lack of restraint, or persistent repetition of words and actions. I'm not sure what their sourcing is exactly for this and what site they went onto, but as this poster directly states, Dutch does have these symptoms seemingly on like a light switch after this concussion is sustained. However, with more serious brain trauma in which this would likely occur with, there's also debilitating symptoms that Dutch definitely does not seem to have. And with most of his other character traits that may hint towards symptoms of said injuries, they're just as easily explained away with being the leader of a gang during a very difficult period, in which the modernizing world is growing in around them, crushing them, members are dying left, right and centre. There's huge power gaps left behind by some of these members, and trust in certain members is also going. And while being hunted by the authorities and finding themselves in gunfights, it's a very stressful position to be in for Dutch. And with jobs going wrong, it feels like he's completely out of control, which is likely a feeling that he's not used to by the events of Red Dead Redemption 2. And thus, through his desperation, compromising his character was a preservation technique above all else. And in the sticky position that Dutch is in, a hindrance of judgment is sure to be incredibly detrimental to the gang, as it's been proven. And making these leadership decisions with even the most minor of head injuries is likely to be even harder. So while the theory that Dutch sustained a brain injury in itself is likely correct in the most loose way, I wouldn't say that he had any lasting brain damage from this alone. Because had Dutch persisted the way that he had in 1899, eventually, probably rather quickly, he'd have found himself getting killed. And as we know, Dutch survived until 1911, showing up every now and then during that time frame, sure, however he was nowhere near as prolific in his criminal actions. And when showing up during the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption 2, seemingly showing an aspect of remorse, or at least that's how I'd describe it, in the moment where he shoots Micah, which he does as a result of realizing that he was the true enemy back in 1899.
What are you doing here, Dutch?
Same as you, I suppose.
Dutch and I are teaming up once more. We got money, we got dreams.
Dutch. Dutch. We all did our best for you. Ain't our fault things turned out the way they did. Dutch, killing me won't solve nothing.
Put down your gun, Marston!
Say something, Dutch. Say something!
I ain't got too much to say no more.
You shot me. You shot me pretty good.
When asked what are you doing here, Dutch, Dutch responded with the same as you, I suppose, leading me to believe that Dutch was always on that mountain with the intent of ending Micah, only teaming up with him to get that opportunity, which in the end John Marston provided, leading me to believe that prior to this point Dutch had reflected on the events of 1899 and realised that Arthur was right about Micah, and left the money because he was never on the mountain for it in the first place, though still seeing the events through his own view. Believing John had betrayed him even still, he once more shows the restraint and logic that he once possessed. This is all unnecessary detail. My point here is, the head injury that Dutch sustained during that trolley mission in Chapter 4 was almost certainly not permanent. On the other hand, the damages done by the stresses and losses of the time were, which in my opinion is what twisted Dutch's character more so than any head injury ever could. Then of course you've got to consider that the stresses just made him crack and unleash who he truly was, which is virtually how John described it when discussing it with Sadie Adler, which was also theorised by Arthur Morgan prior to his passing. And of course, evidence to suggest this would be the Heidi McCourt incident during the Blackwater Massacre, and the events of Red Dead Redemption 1 in 1911, where Dutch seems to have gone back to his absolutely insane kill everyone ways.
Have the girl, John.
Easy, Dutch.
She's a parting gift from me.
No! God damn!
So maybe Dutch has always been looking for an excuse to kill. Maybe it was the demise of the gang that made him so stressed that it changed his mentality into self-preservation mode. The entire point is ambiguous. The explanation will never be given. Was Dutch a good guy turned bad, or was he a bad guy exposed? However, all I know is, Dutch's seeming head injury during Chapter 4 is only one of many reasons as to why everything turned out the way it did. And if I went into too much detail on everything else, then this video would become years long. But I think we've addressed this theory well enough. I'm sorry that this video is as long as it is, but sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. I get carried away with the recording and then suddenly it's been 10 years and I didn't realise it. So I'm going to conclude this one by leaving it up to you. Please do let me know what you think down in the comments section. I personally think Dutch reached his breaking point for a plethora of reasons, though if you want to argue against that, then please be my guest. After all, that's what the comment section is for. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. That would be super appreciated. Before I forget, maybe go ahead and check out my second channel where I post a ton of shit. I want to probably start using it to create a more personal connection between me and you guys. If you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. It would really make my day. Of course, there's a link in the description, so what you do with that information is completely up to you. And I suppose I will see you all very soon with another video at some point.